hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Exactly.
That used to be some of the old way of doing things, right? Yeah, let's just use this inappropriate tool for something that probably should not be used for. Or let's recreate it ourselves. Right? Have you seen that before?
Yeah, the custom build. Yeah.
The custom build that keeps on building.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's an never-ending climb right there. I think that's often one of the things that especially large organizations can sometimes get themselves into the idea that, oh, well, it's just cheaper for us to build it. Maybe, but now you've got to build it and own it and maintain it. And that TCO is usually left out of the decision.
But they keep on building without thinking technology has changed as I've been building, right?
Right.
What I sought out to build and construct before is kind of not relevant with new capabilities that are there.
Yeah.
I mean, topics like last year were just AI, but now we're things like agentic AI, right?
Yeah.
That was not even in the picture till recently.
Thank you so much for joining another edition of the Never-Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined in person by Paul Kurchina. Paul, you are a connector, enterprise architect extraordinaire, and a community builder and evangelist, and you help create containers that bring people together so they can learn. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, it's a funny thing. I came to talk to you today about an enterprise architect learning event in Calgary on June 5th.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, there's no such thing as a free space in your offices. A podcast guest appearance was part of that. Oh, by the way.
I just found that out too. I'm so glad that our teams are helping us make amazing things happen.
Exactly.
One of the things that I know a whole bunch of folks out there in procurement, supply chain, and so on, I think there's sometimes hey, what is an enterprise architect? Because sometimes if somebody's in procurement and they're saying, hey, I need a better way of doing something, sometimes they'll hear that there's an enterprise architect involved in the exercise. And so you're a procurement director, you're an accounts payable lead, or you're a supply chain lead, and suddenly they're like, oh, well, we got to talk to the enterprise architect if you want to make that kind of an investment, that kind of a change. Who are they and what do they do?
They do a variety of things, and the role continues to evolve as technology evolves.
Yeah.
I actually did a podcast a couple days ago with an old friend, I think you know him well, Ranjit Paniker.
Right. Yeah.
We were talking about the life of an enterprise architect.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought Ranjit said it well. A lot of what they do is basically figure out puzzles, right?
Yeah.
And assemble the pieces together. But I don't think not just assemble the pieces together. Sometimes they mess up the puzzle, right?
Sometimes.
Some new opportunities present themselves, right?
Yeah.
And let's just rejig this all over again.
Yeah. Now we need to make space here so we can put the new thing in, but then we need to make sure that we're not trying to put a square peg into a round hole, because that kind of thing around the boardroom table is really unproductive.
And you deal with that with a lot of your customers, right? In terms of, you see companies, that puzzle piece is rammed in where place it should not be in, right?
Right. Stop trying to use it that way. It is not a hammer. Not everything is a nail. These are the kinds of things that for sure we see. So enterprise architects are there in practice and in theory to help make sure that you're not trying to jam a square peg into a round hole where it's not going to make sense.
And I think the important thing today, more in the past, they were more focused on just the technology aspect.
Right.
You know, thank goodness more attuned to the business and talking more of the business.
Yeah.
So you go back to, if your hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Exactly.
That used to be some of the old way of doing things, right? Yeah, let's just use this inappropriate tool for something it probably should not even be used for. Or let's recreate it ourselves. Right? Have you seen that before?
Yeah, the custom build. Yeah.
The custom build that keeps on building.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's a never-ending climb right there. I think that's often one of the things that especially large organizations can sometimes get themselves into the idea that, oh, well, it's just cheaper for us to build it. Maybe, but now you've got to build it and own it and maintain it. And that TCO is usually left out of the decision.
But they keep on building without thinking technology has changed as I've been building, right?
Right.
What I sought out to build and construct before is kind of not relevant with the new capabilities that are there.
Yeah.
I mean, topics like last year were just AI, but now we're things like agentic AI, right?
Yeah.
That was not even in the picture till recently.
Absolutely. I mean, things that used to be damn near impossible are now just hard. But the number of people that are out there that are ready to take that climb and go deal with those hard things, like, they're out there. And then there's companies that are building platforms that just do that. And then there's some teams that are trying to do that in the lab to go take a couple of use cases and prove it out. And I think what enterprise architects that I think both of us have talked to have been trying to remind people that doing something as an experiment to see if it can really work is one thing, but going full custom build on I'm going to build all my own custom agentic AI, it's a little bit like, do you remember 20 years ago when everybody was trying to talk about the internet, we need portals, we need custom
I do remember
websites,
portals.
right? Everybody was doing portals. And if you didn't have a portal, you weren't the cool kid. But there was a couple of years there where if you were going to do one, you were custom building it from scratch, and that's expensive and time consuming and hard to maintain. And then in the meantime, there were organizations that were building platforms that helped companies create portals for a fraction of the cost. And the same thing is happening right now with platforms that are emerging to help enterprises take advantage of AI and agentic AI without custom building it all.
So I want to flip the questions at you, because that's one thing we're going to focus on in our EA community, on helping. So we help architects evolve,
right? And
we help them on both the technology education as well as the human skills side of things,
right?
And it's interesting. There are you almost have to forget what you knew before, right? And I'd be interested to you've been spending a lot of time lately on this agentic AI side of things.
Just
right?
A little bit of time.
And I'd be curious as well, and I'm thinking what programming we do for our community going forward, even thinking about doing an agentic AI for architects bootcamp, so to speak, for that audience.
Right on.
I'd be interested, you've been in the SAP world for a while.
A few years.
And you've been, about a year or so now you've been in the agentic AI side?
I would even push it even a year and a half, almost 2 years now, at the very, very early stages of, just as the concept of the early agents were coming out, we were building and iterating those and putting those into our platform.
So, an idea, like I said, we deal with the enterprise architect SAP community, right?
Yeah.
So words of wisdom for someone lived and breathed the ECC, all that sort of world.
Yeah.
How do you learn about this? What would you do if you were them in terms of learning more about agentic AI? And that whole mindset, a mind shift change, is it that?
It's 100% a mind shift change, because the things that got you here won't get you there, right? And that premise number one means that you've gotten to a point where you have a whole bunch of enterprise systems that are wired together and firing together and sometimes misfiring, and you got somebody over there managing an interface, and you've got different requests and requirements coming in from the business for all of the new stuff, and you're trying to figure out, well, where do I put it?
Right.
One of the first things that I think people have to do is to be ready to let go of some of the things that used to be impossible that are now just hard.
It's almost like if you can dream it, you can build it.
To an extent. And what I often encourage companies to think about doing is run a POC, go try it. And if you're an architect and you have not actually started making daily use of one of the GPTs to help you think through and iterate through things, then you're not even starting to think about the right way, because you've not trained your own mind to start thinking about generating something that you can edit. The other part that I think is super, super critical is the theory and the practice. And enterprises thrive and depend on reliability. But all of the GPTs are completely...
And especially around your oil and gas and utilities, right? Pretty darn key.
Yeah, reliability matters just a little, right? And so when you're getting into that probabilistic generation of content, if you ever want to try an experiment, go take the same question and ask ChatGPT 4 different times, the same exact question. That is not enterprise grade reliability. That is absolutely unacceptable in a world where you need, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sigma reliability.
Right.
So what you need to be able to do in any situation is to merge the probabilistic with the deterministic. And everything that the architects are dealing with today is deterministic logic. If, then, else, etc. Now we create the opportunity to consider the possibilities and how those need to match. that's probably one of the biggest shifts, right? Something that used to be impossible is now not just possible, probable,
Right.
now needs to be matched with an appropriate set of deterministic rules. And this is one of the things for the SAP community. You already have, I'll use procure to pay as an example. You've got a purchase rec, you've got a purchase order, you've got some goods and services receipts, you've got an invoice. Great. Now what? Well, now there's a whole bunch of things that people are doing. And when you look at the things that people are doing, there are a whole host of steps in there where there's people doing things that are very manual. And those become beautiful examples of applying that kind of intelligence to go very quickly take what used to be a team of 20 and now accomplish the same work with a team of 5. And that's the, well, that didn't used to be possible, or I don't believe it, or I tried this with ChatGPT and I couldn't get a consistent result. Yeah, that takes work. But once you've got that, now you can apply it. And I think that even if you're testing something, iterating with it, and you're an architect, go test something. And you can test and iterate on your own for like pennies. For $20 a month or something, you could go test something.
So I'd be curious about some of the use cases that you're deploying. I was actually in San Francisco a couple weeks ago, and there's one partner that was doing some interesting stuff about rewriting code that was clean core compliant, agents and multi-agents.
Yeah.
And the other scenario I saw with another company was around call centers and agents, right?
Yeah.
You know, those are almost low-hanging fruit for some pretty good use cases. What about your world?
Yeah, we're really doubling down in that intake to pay. And so, because, I mean, everything that we've built in the last more than a decade is built around the embedded complexity within SAP. So that's a comfortable space for us. And I think a lot of other organizations that are aiming to do agentic related work there, they're still trying to figure out how to plug into SAP. Well, we were born out of it, right? And I think that's something that I would encourage an architect to really consider, right? Is you're dealing with complexity. Yeah. Simplicity is a goal, but oversimplicity is a recipe for a bit of a kitchen fire. And so I think that is, whether you're in safety or not, is something that you want to avoid. So considering how the use cases for taking 8 different accounts payables teams and collapsing that down to one small team that handles exceptions or unusual cases, or taking the exercises in procurement and automating the routine things of going out and just checking for 3 quotes on things that need to be done very, very quickly, or automating the validation of receipts to go and say, hey, did this really meet the standard that we expected? Did we scan it? Did we take the picture? Did we quality assure it? How can we automate that? So those types of examples, or even just making sure that you've genuinely thought through the way that you're contracting, genuinely thought through and risk ranked, risk evaluated the contract before you go, yeah, it's probably fine. Because no procurement team has ever been brought in too late to rush a deal for something that was somebody else's emergency that suddenly drops in procurement. And that's where I think those teams need the ability to continue to improve the behavior and be easier to deal with and make the experience, the customer experience for the business organizations easier, including enterprise architects, when they need to buy something from time to time, or their teams do, but also to be able to respond more quickly, because there's often the process that's been designed requires 17 steps and checklists for compliance and risk avoidance and avoidance of safety issues and so on. So now how can you evaluate those things more quickly? How can you onboard a supplier in a day, not 3 weeks? And those kinds of things become possible because it's no longer waiting for these 7 people to go do something and hand it over into the next top of the inbox and then hand it over to the next top of the inbox. Many of those things can be done sequentially in seconds. And so that what used to be impossible is now just hard.
So I'm very curious. So you implement it inside a client, right?
Yeah.
Your product scenario, how do you best term it?
So Rio is a platform, but it also is embedded within the ERP.
So you implement your platform inside. You help companies, get down from what took 20 down to 5, right?
Yeah.
Now I'm curious in terms of that is an eye opener inside the company.
Oh yeah.
I'd be scratching my head if I was inside the company. So we just did this here. Why aren't we doing this other places? So I'm curious of the ripple inside an organization, because they're looking over there. They're doing that over here that way, right? And
Yeah.
what the heck are we doing on our end still?
Absolutely.
Do you see that?
Oh, 100%. And you get am I next?
Yeah.
And so, it's a brilliant privilege to be able to have that, right? I mean, sure, we'd love to help you with that. And, we're booking in 3 months, like the luxurious problem. And what I see is the demand and the outcomes are absolutely demonstrated. The tipping point of theory versus practical results has been crossed. It's no longer the theory of, maybe something could happen. There's now, even going back a year, demonstrated use cases where it's gone, now we want to do that here. We want to do that here. Sometimes the wrestling then becomes which business case moves forward, which group gets the attention first. That's an interesting role for an enterprise architect to weigh in on, because the business case for one group might appear higher, but the technical lift or downstream implications might make that not the right spot to check, not the right spot to start with. And I think something like invoicing or accounts payable is so fast because everybody has it. It's very difficult to argue with that being a simple, straightforward, safe place, because in some cases they might be going, we've only got 5 people doing that. Really? What about the 17-person outsourced group that handles the rest of it for you? Oh yeah. And then that becomes, again, it's a different conversation.
And if the business don't get their stuff, there can be ramifications, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And actually, the other interesting, as much as people may see cool things that are outside their organization, right? Things usually come down to, that probably would not work here.
Oh, and there's always a Bob that says, we tried that 4 years ago, it didn't work because A, B, C, D. And great, go help bring the architect to help remind Bob why that's now possible.
Yep.
And I think that's where in some of the business groups, sometimes there's a sense of, I don't know if I want to talk to IT. But if the architect can be there as an ally to come and help justify and think through the downstream implications and how something could be done, beautiful question start. One of my favorite beginnings of a question is, what would need to be true? And if you take that, what would need to be true for this to be done quickly within the span of, a couple months?
Yep.
That's a different question, because I think there's also still an idea that, anything that we touch is going to be, a year and $5 million. And that's no longer true. Maybe it used to be. And in this way, circle it back to what we started with, unlearning some of what used to be true that is no longer the case. And I think those architects are in a tremendous opportunity right now with how fast things are changing to be that leader that the organization needs to unlock that. And so thank you for championing the community and helping educate, inform, and inspire.
I do have one more thing for your podcast. One more question for you.
One more thing. Just one more thing.
One more thing. So the
famous last words.
Last thing is, we help the architects evolve, right?
Yeah.
And especially we want to really amp up the focus on agentic AI.
Yeah.
So what I'm thinking of is bringing in together architects for like a 1-day boot camp on agentic AI.
Right on.
So I'd be interested in your thoughts. How would you design a 1-dayer for enterprise architects? That's a bit of an eye-opener. It gives some practical things for them to take back and think about doing inside their organization. So design today.
I would start with here's what used to be true, and here's some highlights of why that's no longer true, because this now is. Now here's how you think about it a little differently. How do you identify some of the best use cases for it? And then get into a little hands-on session, right?
What about show and tells inside it too of some other stuff?
I mean, anybody that wants to learn more about what we've done, of course, we're delighted to do that. We've done some public demos on LinkedIn of some great use cases of things that make things fast.
And I'll probably bring some architects in here on June 5th in Calgary to see some of that.
That sounds amazing. That sounds brilliant.
Just as long as I don't have to do another interview again.
No. You only have to talk to me once in a while, Paul.
Okay.
I would say then wrap up with something hands-on, right? Even if it's like, hey, here's a ChatGPT account. Now let's get in and do this. Now, just even in Excel, like copy and paste into and out of Excel to really create step one premise, ask question. step 2, go like build a workbook exercise, and to really have it hit home, I would start with just a little Excel worksheet of, hey, here's a couple of questions, like pick one of these scenarios, maybe you have 2 or 3 scenarios, start with that, and now ask the question, and now get a response back, and now get the same response back again, and now get the same response back again. Compare the 3, because they should be different. We expect they would be.
Right.
And then you go down to the next step, and now figure out how would you take a scenario, and now figure out what needs to happen next, right? There's context that's required. How would you provide some guidance and context of what you go do next? And when you walk somebody through a hands-on exercise like that, I find that it brings them back down to the fundamentals, but it also means that they're literally putting their hands on something as a workflow.
Right.
Nobody needs to code for this. You can literally do it with an Excel spreadsheet to have the exercise of the flow of how you would then connect it.
Okay.
Right? And that to me is a beautiful example. Then a developer can come in later, because not every architect started as a developer. Some of them started as a business lead, right? Or somebody that really came in from a non-technical background that's learned enough about how technical things get wired together. But to be able to go do that and say, hey, you come out the other end with a crisp example of their own use case that they can go take home, and then now they can pattern match to say, hey, based on these use cases, here are some ways that we can go plug this in, because there'll be a whole bunch of different ways that they can go buy something off the shelf now to go quickly plug in. And one of the best things that they can do as an outcome afterwards is go get a couple of demos and then narrow down to 2 or 3. And something I love, there's a lot of procurement teams that are still stuck on an RFP. So when your architect is next trying to figure out, this is gonna be 6 months if we gotta work through procurement, try a pilot. Invite 2 or 3 organizations to come in and do a week-long pilot to show you something coming out of your exercise of what's your straw outline of what problem you're going to solve. Then as homework, once they get home, see if they can invite 2 or 3 organizations in, make sure that there's actually budget, make sure that they're actually going to be able to move forward, and then run like a week-long pilot and score the pilot across the 2 or 3 organizations, right? And then at that point, you get a real live example of, and a much deeper evaluation much more quickly that can be scored, evaluated, and then taken back to procurement and say, look, we did 3 bids. Let's go.
Oh, interesting.
Way faster than an RFP. And I think this is the other thing.
Doing things differently.
Doing things differently, right? How do you honor the spirit of the compliance and create 3 bids and run it as a fair process without taking 6 months to try to make an evaluation and a decision, because that's too long and we need to move faster.
Do it and show it versus reading about it through pages and pages of responses. Through
some awful Excel spreadsheet that was prepared and sent, and somebody ChatGPT the response.
Well, that's all they do now, right?
Right, that's what they're doing.
ChatGPT writes it now, and then basically they come in, ChatGPT reads it now, right?
Right.
And
so let's
just
cut
talking to
through
each
the
other.
bullshit and go straight to something hands-on, and then you actually touch it and feel it. And there is no substitute for that. Now, you might still need a little ChatGPT summary to compare, but get hands on it. And it's so important. And get the architect involved in that process, because they're going to have some extra questions to understand how well it's going to fit, to make sure you don't end up with a square peg in a round hole.
Great. So this worked out good. You got your podcast. I got some tips in terms of my agentic AI bootcamp for architects.
Brilliant.
So
and some people got to watch. Paul, thanks. Great to see you as always. Thanks so much. And this has been another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. We'll see you soon.